Welcome to another episode for Data for Future, where we explore the synergy between data and sustainability. One of my focus with the second season is to uncover the career possibilities in the rapidly growing climate sector. In today's episode, we're delving into the field of sustainability management with our guest, Louis Chen. Louis is a sustainability manager for an investment holding company, where he leads the sustainability strategies, conducts ESG due diligence, and oversees sustainability reporting. But beyond that, Luis is also a big side hustler. He's also a trustee for a UK charity, where he plays a key role in establishing and enforcing sustainability policies. Moreover, he's also a co-founder and advisor to various climate tech startups. So today, let's learn from Luis' extensive experience in sustainability together. Welcome to the show, Luis.
Thank you so much, Tammy, for the introduction and having me here today.
So to start off, tell us more about your work as a sustainability manager.
Yes. So let me introduce a bit about myself also. So I'm Louis. So I'm currently based in Singapore, and as Tammy shared, I'm working as a sustainability manager in Golden Energy and Resources. So to share a bit of what I do, so that I know whoever who wish to land a sustainability role know what to expect, I can give some overview. So this is not really related to my job, but in the morning I like to exercise first to keep myself alert and energized before I start the day. I think that is quite important in this sustainability space where things are quite changing quite fast actually. But immediately when you reach about 8, 9 o'clock in Singapore time, I think it's important for me to also keep myself updated with latest happenings. For example, I read different articles like from Wall Street journals or even from local newspapers or even the different news channels out there. So and also I think I met Tammy on the platform called Work on Climate. So I think I also check on Work on Climate to see if there's any questions, any updates that I want to learn and keep myself up to date. After that, about half an hour to an hour, I'll then do analysis. That of course depends on what is the job requirement for me. Whether is it looking at the geopolitics scene in Australia, which is where most of the company subsidiaries are located in terms of mining. Um, it can also be looking into the different technologies that are coming up because Good Energy and Resources, we invest in mining companies. So of course we all know that mining and metals has a lot of carbon emissions. So what I look at is what are some potential technologies with a good carbon abatement potential to reduce the carbon intensities in our mines. So I just do research on that as well. After that, there may be some meetings. It's day-to-day varies. Some days have no meetings, some days there's a lot of meetings. So I talk to the subsidiaries sustainability team to know what is happening, any help that I can support them on, what are some plans, updates. Usually, mostly, or part of the time, it's also regulatory compliance because in Australia, there's a lot of reporting requirements beyond just ESG. I think before this whole ESG scene came into place, there's already a lot of requirements that you have to report. Even the carbon emissions from your mines, you have to report it way beyond this movement. So I'll talk to the subsidiary sustainability team. So by then it'll be after lunch or lunch already. Second half of the day, it involves me also meeting people, either people who hold some technology who wish to sell to the company. So I'll look into those technologies as well, or I'll go for events, just to learn. Because I think that sustainability is a space, especially you can't just read from your laptop. You also have to go out, meet people, learn about different sectors. You can't just be too fixated in investments or metals and mining, because I think what happens in other sectors will affect your own sector as well in one way or another. So that's what I do. And of course, after that, then that's how my days generally goes. But no day is the same so far. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks for the introduction of walking us through your day. Can you introduce a little more about how the sustainability team is structured?
Sure. So we are the holding company or the group level company. So we have our own sustainability team, and of course we oversee and support the sustainability team in the subsidiaries as well. So it's more of for what I like to say is always we are more of a collaborative, a team type organization. I don't really believe in top down or any sorts of those sort of things. So I think we work together towards a common goal, and the common goal is of course the minimum baseline, as most companies would claim to be. It is for regulatory compliance. But more important than that, I always believe and enforce the idea that we have to be proactive. So look to different frameworks that will be upcoming. For example, I think later on I can share a bit about the nature-based frameworks, TNFD. Even though it may not be a regulatory requirement yet, I think it's important to keep ourselves up to date to it. Or to look at how the elections, for example, in Australia may affect the policies, especially when it comes to environmental or sustainability related. So I like the stance of proactive instead of reactive, because I think that it makes more sense to be not a market laggard, at least to be more of a middle, if not a market leader when it comes to the mining space. Yes.
Be more proactive.
Yes,
You
definitely.
mentioned a lot about technology when it comes to the commodity or mining industry. What technologies are you focusing on? That do you focus on technology that reduce the emission at the extraction phase, or carbon removal and storage?
Sure. So when it comes to the different technologies that we look at, there are quite a few, so I can share a bit about what kind of technologies we look at. I think mainly it's because mining is very intensive when it comes to scope one. So I can share a bit about scope one. So scope one basically is the emissions that a company directly contributes to the society. So it's direct emissions. It can come from stationary combustion. For example, when we burn fuel, that is scope one. It can also come from mobile combustion, which is when we have trucks, and then they obviously need energy, they need fuels to use. So that's also scope one. And what's interesting, the mining space is actually what we call fugitive emissions. Now, fugitive emission is not only seen in mining, obviously, but in mining it's especially prevalent, because for coal mining or metallurgical coal mining, when we actually mine the substance out, there's a lot of fugitive emissions, mainly methane, that will leak out to the environment as well. And I think that we all know that methane has a higher global warming potential than carbon. So 1 ton of methane is much more damaging than 1 ton of CO2. So then the question is, how can we make use of these gases or reduce these gases? So one technology that we look at is we do not really implement it yet, but it's carbon capture. So carbon capture basically it means or carbon removal. Basically, we use technologies or ways, direct air capture, for example, to actually take in this carbon dioxide or methane and store it in geological surfaces deep underground. Why is it deep underground? Because we definitely do not want any leakages that comes out from it afterwards. That's one way we can use it. Another way we can have direct air capture is that once the carbon dioxide or methane is being absorbed, we can also use it as a source of fuel in our trucks, for example, and burn it. So that, I guess, is in a way a bit of circular economy, because we're making use of it. And that has two benefits, correct? The first benefit is that it reduces the impact of our methane to the environment. And secondly is that we do not need to burn that much fuel when it comes to that, because we're using the methane that was emitted. So I think carbon removal is one technology that I'm particularly interested in. I think there's drawbacks such as too expensive, it's not really financially feasible yet. That is obviously understandable. So we are still looking at that. That's one. Another thing that we of course look at is in the carbon credit space. So this one is not really it's not a priority, in the sense that I think we all, or most companies, I would love to believe, do not believe that carbon credit should be the only way in which we reduce our carbon emissions. But carbon credit should only be used for what we call the residual emissions, whereby we cannot reduce because it's impossible, in my opinion, for companies to have no emissions at all. Like, no matter how you do it, it's not possible. There will always be maybe 10% of residual emissions. That's where carbon credits should actually come in. So I look into that space. I look into whether the price of carbon credits, the types of carbon credits, because there's a difference between nature-based carbon credits and technological-based carbon credits. And the price is being affected by the how credible it is. So the more credible it is, the higher the price is it going to be. And of course, there's different markets that are trading and all sorts of things. So I look into that space as well. Personally, when the question was about what do I look into, I think I look into how can we ensure that we are able to monitor, report, and verify what we call the MRV of carbon credits. Because it's one thing to just buy a random carbon credits, but it's another thing to ensure that the carbon credit has evidence that actually it is that the carbon that is so-called claimed to have abated or removed is actually truly being done. So the MRV is what I look at when I investigate the carbon credit space. And the last thing I can share is about, the usual renewable energy, solar, electric vehicles, to see what's happening in those scenes as well. I think the difficulties about electric vehicles, especially when it comes to the mining trucks, is that the it really heavily depends on the capacity of the battery. If the battery storage and capacity is not strong enough, it is not really economically or even environmentally feasible for the trucks to keep on going back to get recharged. There'll be a lot of downtimes, and downtime is not really efficient when it comes to mining because every minute actually counts to the amount of things we can actually mine out. So but I think electric vehicles is something that will be a thing in the future, just maybe not now, because the battery scene is not that strong yet when it comes to mining electric vehicles. Yes.
Okay, you mentioned carbon capture and removal, carbon credits, and then like renewable energy in general. Those are exciting trends and news about technology we can look for. But what are your current investments in?
Uh, so we currently, Good Energy, we invest in mining companies. We don't really invest in technologies per se, but we buy technologies to be used in the mines. So for
Yes.
example, we look into the fuel truck. Instead of using full diesel, we can look into biodiesel. So biodiesel is obviously much more, it's slightly more environmentally friendly because there are claims that biofuel is carbon neutral, correct? Because for plants, when they are plants, for basic understanding is that they absorb carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. So if we use it as a source of fuel, there is technically no net carbon being emitted. So we try and have a blend of carbon neutral biofuels together with normal traditional fuels. It has to be at a certain blend, which I can't really disclose, that has to be financially feasible because biofuel is still a bit more expensive than
Mm.
traditional fuels. So we have to manage that amount. We also look into using the methane example was a good one that I shared. We are looking into the technology to use methane that was being absorbed as a source of fuel as well, because fugitive emissions takes up in most mining coal companies, it should be more than 30-40% of their scope 1 emissions anyways. So that's what we need to look at as well. Yeah, so these are the two areas. We also look at other things such as working with universities to actually look into researching the certain types of plants, whether they can be used as a good source of biofuels or not as well. Yes.
Sure. Nowadays, there's more and more carbon capture and removal startups getting funding. Seems to be a very trending area, and a lot of their target is exactly on the mining sets, how they can directly capture the emission, fugitive emission there, and transform it into carbon. When we talk about sustainability and strategy, what are some KPIs you have?
Sure. I think for the KPI sort of things, we of course look at the regulatory requirements, compliance, because that is definitely needed for a company to actually survive. So I can share a bit about the Australian landscape is that there is a mechanism called the safeguard mechanism, whereby for mining or locations in general, there has more than 100 tons of CO2 being emitted. They'll be under this safeguard mechanism, whereby they are required to reduce their carbon intensity by about 4.97% every year. So if you don't
Okay.
reduce it, then you have to buy what we call safeguard mechanism credits. So these safeguard mechanism credits is like carbon credits, just that it's only being used or it's only being able to be generated by these locations that are enforced by this safeguard mechanism. So meaning that these safeguard mechanism credits cannot be bought from, let's say, Vietnam, because it's not valid, it's not related at all. So of course, number one is we have to satisfy this safeguard mechanism framework, which I think we are quite on track, at least for the companies that I am seeing currently. That's good. That's the first key KPI. Besides the environmental, I think always believe in the social side of things as well. So I think we also look into the lost time injury frequency rate, LTIFR, lost time injury safety rate also as well. So basically these numbers there are basically talking about in 100,000 hours, for example, how many people are being injured, for how long, how severe were the injuries. Because mining, I think we all have the impression that it's extremely dangerous. I think it may be in some other jurisdiction, but Australia generally is actually quite good. The average LTIFR and LTISR of the mining scene in Australia is much lower than in certain other parts of the world. But that
Okay.
being said, we don't want the number to just be better than average, correct? We want it to be much better. We want it to be as low or as ideal as possible. So we always look into minimizing the number, making it as safe as possible, and educating the miners on what are some safety precautions. So safety to me, and I think to the mining scene, to whoever who works in mining, should be the priority, because any death rate is really not good. And I'm glad to say that we have none, which is amazing. So yes, there's another key matrix that we look at as well. Yeah.
Well, that leads us back to the ESG reporting aspect you were talking about. We touched briefly upon the scope 1 emission, and there's further scope 2 and 3. I just want to know from like how when you're working on the ESG reporting, how easy or difficult it is to get all those numbers for your company. I guess mining scope one is a huge chunk, and I
Yeah.
don't know if you already have every data well collected or you're still facing different challenges.
For scope one, I think we are pretty on track. I'm sure. I don't think there's any blind spot. Maybe there are, but I think we are very much on track. There's always audit or assurance being done on it. So scope one, we're pretty there. And since as I shared earlier, this scope one reporting is already long required in Australia before this ESG movement came along. So I think everyone is fine with that. I think scope two. So scope two for the audience who may not understand this is basically indirect emissions. So it can come from purchased electricity, whether it's steam, heat, or cooling. So scope two, we're also collecting it pretty frequently, pretty easily as well, because it's just about electricity bills, those sort of things. And since it's purchased, correct? So there must always be a receipt, there must always be an invoice, there will always be a party to liaise with. So it's extremely easy to get the data or to get data that can be verified.
Mhm.
I think scope three is then the interesting part, because scope three is about indirect emissions that happens across the whole value chain. So mining is actually pretty upstream in the value chain, but of course we also have to look at the emissions more upstream of us, which is, for example, where do our equipments actually come from? For example, that's one way to look up more upstream than us. And downstream can also be about when we have waste, how is it being managed? Because when we do operations, there will also be waste being generated as well. So how do we actually use it? So those are under scope three emissions. So we are still in the process of collecting a reliable and credible scope three data. Um, but luckily, according to the ISSB, which is a latest standard that has been being announced in the sustainability reporting scene, they are quite clear that when we release or when we are required to report on scope three, it does not have to be fully accurate, because they understand the challenges that companies will have when it comes to first reporting their scope three, and they don't want that to be a barrier or hindrance for companies being afraid to report scope three. So I guess it does give us more a safety net, but we will try our best to make the data as credible as possible. But scope three, in my opinion, cannot be just looking upstream and downstream and collect all the possible data. I think what we're doing is we're trying to identify the hotspots or major suppliers of us that contributes a lot to our equipment, for example, and then starting the collection of data from them first,
Yeah.
because I think it's more important to collect the more material ones. And at least I guess it's easy for us also because our suppliers, for example, they also supply to a lot of other companies. So they will also have been required to report to them as well. So it's not like our supplier is not like a company which has not done about scope one, scope two, scope three emissions reporting before, and suddenly they must do this. So I guess that makes it easier for us. Yes.
Right. I guess as you mentioned, as mining is more on the upper stream of the supply
Yes.
chain, you have a very relatively more mature system. Want to wrap back to the scope two measurement when you said, it's about mostly energy. And what is the percentage of energy, clean energy usage in all the holding companies you have?
Okay, I can't give an exact value as of now. A percentage of clean energy okay, so how we get our energy is either from we do, because in Australia there's a very strong grid capacity system. I think what the Australian government is trying to do is they're trying to improve the capacity, because there's a lot of feedback being given that there's a lot of solar farms in Australia that has too much supply and the grid cannot support it. So
Mm.
currently we're at the stage of we are trying to get approvals to improve the grid capacity so that they're able to store our solar energy, because we do look into solar farms and all sorts of technology, but we need those solar farms to not just keep their energy in that area then, but they have to supply it to the grid for us to use it, or for at least for us to be able to sell it to other parties near that grid transmission line.
Okay.
So yes, I don't have an exact number of how many percent as of now. It could be found in our I don't think it's in our sustainability report, because our sustainability report only shows the scope 2 emissions and the kWh that is being used. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Okay. So you have enough supply. You just need to connect the supply demand side to reach to a better performance, if I
Of course,
understood correctly.
ideally we will want more supply, because obviously we want all our whole electricity to be renewables.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. So the goal is 100% clean energy. And if there is any barrier as of now, is to really build this connection tunnel between supply and demand, and even have more supplies.
Yes, of course, we could also look into getting renewable energy certificates, RECs, which we could buy it from outside places. So that's also part of the idea of we changing all our traditional electricity to or coal-powered electricity to renewables. It also
Mm.
involves getting RECs and even PPAs. Yeah.
Okay, sure. And if we dissect ESG, we talk a lot about the environmental carbon side. About S and the G, how important is that in your reporting? We mentioned that the social part is also important because of the labor aspect in mining. So introduce us more about the S and G.
Sure. So I think that yes, as you mentioned, the safety part is actually quite important to us because that is the foundation of mining. And besides the aspect, I think we also look into other things of S. For example, look into employees' well-being, because I think that if the employees are not feeling belong, or if there's a huge attrition rate and high turnover rate, I think it's going to be very hard. Because I think companies don't really understand how hard is it to actually train an employee compared to putting in effort to actually retain one employee. There's actually a lot of huge cost. I'm sure all those HR or executive search firms can actually tell the data or have the data out there already. So that's a huge thing that we actually focus on, at least not me, but the HR team actually focuses on by ensuring that everyone is feeling well-being or feeling happy. There's a lot of activities being planned. So the S, when it comes to the employees' well-being, is something that we look at. We also look into things such as the diversity. I think diversity is a very interesting topic in Asia, I guess, because there's of course a huge debate about whether diversity actually drives performance or not. I think that personally, my own view is that and when it comes to diversity, we can't just look at one particular matrix, for example, gender, or for example, socioeconomic class, or for example, educational background. I think we have to look at it as a whole. Because if we just fully blindly focus that, okay, we need to have more younger employees or more elderly employees or what, I think that to me, there's not much direct correlation between having more younger employees, for example, to a company's performance. But I'm sure it's a huge complications or huge interplay between the different diversity factors that we have to look at. But that being said, anyway, for reporting purposes, we have to report the percentage of female employees in the board, for example. I think that pushes, I'm not sure if you know, but that actually pushes the company to actually be more aware of the need to have more voices in the company or more gender in the companies, because mining actually is I'm sure we all know that it's a very male-dominated workforce. I think
Yeah.
that's how nature is, correct? But I can't remember the number also, but I'm pretty sure our percentage of females in the workforce is above the average percentage for the mining sector. So that's something we are quite proud of. But we of course want to hit parity, which is 50%. It's a bit hard. I don't think any mining company has ever reached that. But that's of course a goal that we think is possible, because there should not be limitation, correct? I think that if a female is able to perform as well as a male in the mining space, why should they be disadvantaged? There should be no reason why they want to do so. So that's nothing we look at for social. As for governance, I think, to me, I find that the term ESG, the governance is something that's always been in most companies, because governance is about risk compliance, it's about regulatory compliance as well. So all companies, especially if you're listed, should be quite strong on the governance piece, because that includes things such as remuneration framework, about accountability, any corruption. I think that, at least in my idealistic perspective, I think that most companies should be fine or should have been well prepared for the governance thing. So that's not something that I look at specifically as well, because
Okay.
we have a in-house lawyer who actually look after this piece. But of course, the sustainability report has to report the governance piece. But it's pretty, in my opinion, it's pretty straightforward, because it is a lot of compliance things which already has to be reported anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's also very industry and sector specific. I read a recent report on BCG, like when companies are performing ESG due diligence, certain sectors, the governance is actually super important. For example, for technology, media, communication companies, they want to know not like the company is actually healthy. The one they bought, they wouldn't just like break apart because of
Yeah.
malmanagement.
Yes.
Okay. So actually, there's one point on the ESGE, the environmental aspect I want to ask you. Since mining nowadays is not only about carbon on the environmental front, right? There's also biodiversity, maybe something more you would like to introduce, but specifically on the biodiversity part. Since it's a little bit hard to measure, I don't know if there's regulation existing in place already required reporting, or are you looking into this data already?
Sure. Yes, I think a good point you raised. I think that most companies, whether is it mining or not mining, they mainly focus on carbon because carbon is quite easy to be defined or collected, correct? It's just tons of CO2, and with the different GHGs emission types of gas, you can easily convert it to this using the global warming potential to convert it to tons per CO2. But I think that biodiversity is an up and coming theme in different companies. More investors are actually looking into the biodiversity space as well. As a quick introduction, so biodiversity to me at least is just about the different types of living organisms and also the ecosystems that they actually interact with. So I look into the quality of species and the quantity of those species and how do they interact with the ecosystem. But the biodiversity to me is part of a broader category called natural capital. The natural capital is born in biodiversity because it includes things like the soil, the geology, the air. These are things that we also have to look into place because at least for mining companies, it's always in the spotlight, correct? Because wherever we mine, obviously there's damage to the environment. So we are so-called using up natural capital. And since historical times, natural capital has not been internalized into companies' financial statements or financial accounting because we can just take it from nature and no one can claim a price to it, correct? I think that has to change. I think we have to be more aware, or at least the world is being more aware that natural capital is as good as financial capital, as good as human capital. These are things we should put a price to it. So I don't think in the world there's many different regulatory requirements when it comes to biodiversity yet, but luckily there's a framework called the TNFD, Task Force for Nature Related Financial Disclosure, which is to me like so-called a friend of TCFD. So TCFD is the Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures, whereby the document is quite long, but if you all want to look into it, it's quite good because it talks about how can we identify or how can in a company, how can we identify potential biodiversity related risk and opportunities and therefore work into it? I think that companies should look into biodiversity more because on two fronts. The first front is because companies actually, in my opinion, depend a lot on biodiversity. For example, whether is it mining or whether is it a beverage company, we will need fresh water supply for whatever purposes. And or like if food companies need land that is available, correct? So this means that we need to take it from the nature. So if there's anything wrong with the nature, or if you abuse it too much, there will be a point whereby these resources are no longer available, and then so what? Are we well prepared for it? Did we put in place strategies to ensure that this time does not come? So there's an idea of dependency to me. So the other aspect that I can share is the idea of impact. So obviously when companies like mining or beverage companies, for example, we may actually damage the environment in some sense. And therefore, if we do it in a way that is too damaging or that is damaging and we don't do anything to help resolve it, I think there's a lot of reputational damage and there may even be legal actions because when we damage the environment, there may be communities around it. And the question is, did we take them into account, meaning that did we consult them? And if not, there's going to be a lot of legal implications and even financial losses from the legal implications. So there's so much interplay between a company's operations and the biodiversity or the nature around it. I think more attention has to be placed into that aspect as well.
Mhm.
Yep. So I think that, as you shared earlier, I think that it's very hard to measure biodiversity because what exactly is a good measurement? Are we going to say that a zebra is worth the same as the grasshopper or not? I think so difficult because in my knowledge, I don't think there's anything called a good good biodiversity offsets yet. Because is it possible to say that, if we save one zebra there and you claim one biodiversity offset, does it mean that we damage one zebra here? Is it okay? So there's all these different things that makes it so hard. But I think that more laws and more legislations will actually be in place. I think that France, I think quite some time ago, they already came out with some laws on reclaiming biodiversity in their country. But Europe is Europe and they are quite well ahead when it comes to biodiversity and carbon. And Singapore or ASEAN or Asia is not as far ahead. But I think we will get there and because of different reasons.
Yeah, definitely a very, very significant planetary boundary there. And it is indeed a problem that we lack the proper way of doing measurement, thus
Mm,
we cannot really improve.
yeah.
And maybe hopefully we'll see some emerging solutions soon. Okay, so you mentioned in your job that you also perform ESG due diligence. And can you go a little bit in depth of that? What does it mean by ESG due diligence and what does it achieve?
Sure. So I think there's two fronts of ESG due diligence that I do. I think that the first one is, I said earlier that I look into technologies. So I will do a due diligence into the company that has invented or patented or created a particular technology. And that involves looking into things such as, I think it's what traditional financial due diligence is to look at the performance of the company. How long have they been around for? How experienced is the management team? I think the key thing we look out for also is, has this technology been used in mining sites? And in particular, has they been used in mining sites in Australia? Because there's always a risk, correct, whereby the technology has been used quite well in Australia, America, US, for example, but if you bring it to Australia, there could be some geological constraints or whatever that makes it impossible to use in Australia. So these are the things we look at. We also look into the technical feasibility of the technology. I'm not an engineer myself, but I guess I can understand a bit of how things actually works. If not, I can ask the team around me as well. So whether is it possible or whether it is suitable for those technologies to be used in the mining site. And also I think mining, we may all hear that mining is just, you may think that it's just one commodity, but there's different types. Because there's gold, there is metallurgical coal, there's thermal coal, there is lithium, there is uh silver, those sort of things. Different types of minerals requires different types of mining techniques. For example, there's surface mining, there's underground mining. Some mining techniques are more suitable for one type of commodities. So we can't just assume that because the technology has been used for mining, that means it can be used for the gold mine site, for example. These are some sorts of due diligence that I look into. Of course, I also look into the pricing, whether the rate that they charge actually makes financial sense for the company. Because I think that it wouldn't make sense to spend a few million for technology which will not allow us to save much carbon emissions. I think that there's not much financial benefit as well. I think there has to be a financial case. I think only when you work in a corporate sustainability space, then you realize the importance of ensuring that whatever sustainability policies has to make some sort of financial sense. I think we're not a philanthropic arm of a big company, so that's something we also look into as well. So that is the technical or the technology due diligence that I try to look into. The other side of due diligence that I look into would be when it comes to looking the minerals that we're trying to expand into. I think that especially in today's age, there's a lot of energy transition. There's a lot of new sorts of technology which needs different minerals. For example, lithium, phosphate, these sort of things. So I will look into exploring those particular commodities, resources, looking into, for example, where are these minerals being mined at, mainly, where not more importantly, not just where it's being mined, but where is it being processed. And I can tell you that most of the time it's in China because they are quite strong when it comes to this sort of supply chain. So I will also look into this particular mineral. What role does it have to play in the energy transition? Because I think we are quite sure that energy transition must and will happen. So we know, and with that, we already know what kind of minerals are more important. So I'll look into the market potential of this mineral, because no one mines a mineral to be stored. People mine it to either be traded or to be sold. So there must be a demand. So I'll look into so-called forecasting into the potential demands of these particular minerals, and are we able to form some form of value chain or partnership with other organizations which are also looking into these minerals or have strong capabilities in processing these minerals? Because we don't have any processing side of things. So we can't just buy, for example, lithium and then process it in some other place. We have to have a strong value chain and partners. So these are things that we look at, as I look at as well.
Okay, you talk a lot about energy transition. What are the hot minerals on your list now?
Hot minerals, I think it's a lot. I think it's like lithium, it can be phosphate, it can be nickel. I think there is yeah, but basalt, for example, these are all the few things we look into. Yes.
And is your company also considering the recycling aspect? Since, as you know, mining, we are depleting many resources, and there's more
Yes.
and more circular economy models coming up.
Yeah. Yes, I think we do look into trying to reduce the waste being generated from those sort of things. I mean, personally, I also look into. I think there's some technologies in the ASEAN or Singapore market. I think there's some technology in the universities here whereby they look, battery usually requires a lot of lithium, but I think they're trying to change the metal or the mineral to a less critical, to a mineral that is much more available.
Mhm.
I think it's sodium or something. I think Tesla also does that. So that's what they're trying to do. So yes, to answer your question, yes, we're looking into not just mining, correct? Because there's a finite amount of resources available
Yeah.
on land, and we can't just keep on mining. Yeah.
And during your research, I wonder on the data aspect, what's the mix between qualitative and quantitative data do you use, and how much of this data you actually need to purchase them from a third party?
Yeah. So for qualitative and quantitative, I think for me, I look more into the qualitative side of things on the macroeconomic trends or the geopolitical trends, those sort of things, and how can it affect. Quantitative data, I will then look into, for example, let me think about the energy demand, for example, about which country takes up the most. Sounds a bit simplistic now, but actually it's more than this. But like, what is the percentage of energy mix in a particular country? Where is this mineral being shipped to around the world? Sort of quantitative things. In terms of where do we purchase it, we do have access to Bloomberg.
Mhm.
I think that cost is quite expensive, but we do have access to it. We also
Mhm.
look into S&P and Moody's, this sort of different things. Yeah, but more qualitative than quantitative. Yes.
And how would you say, like, to perform your analysis in
Mm.
your day-to-day work, what are some biggest challenges you encounter in the data front?
I think the biggest challenge to me, at least, is that in this sustainability space or in this data front, is that I think I do not see that data can always mean evidence, because there could be two numbers that could be correlated to one another or could show a particular trend, but actually it does not mean A and B could both increase. But I have to be aware that it does not mean that A affects B or A causes B. The usual term of correlation and causation, there are two different things.
Yeah.
I think it's how can I be consciously aware that A may not have been improving B, but it could be C. But I wouldn't have known that there's something called C. So I think it's to be aware of that, to test my assumptions. I think it's something I want to do, because I think in research, especially whether it's qualitative or quantitative, we keep on just trying to find data to support our stance. I think that in the
Yeah.
investment, that tends to be the case, correct? We want to sell something, that we just find all the possible data to bring it in and then try to portray this to the clients. But luckily in my space, we don't really sell anything, correct? Because we most likely the buyer of things. So it gives me the freedom to actually look at, okay, I have this particular perspective that I have or I'm being given. I'm going to find data to, of course, support it. But let me also stop halfway and try to find the other side of things. If I am on the opposing view, am I able to find as much data to actually contradict this? And if so, then I need to reconcile which one makes more sense. Then
Okay.
luckily the team is quite open to hearing both sides, correct? So it does not endanger me or anything. Yeah.
Interesting. And how do you gain more knowledge or capacity to do that, to not confound causation and correlation?
I think is being the first thing is, of course, to be aware that this is a common thing that may happen to anyone. This assumption bias or confirmation bias matter. So that's to be aware. Number two is to then talk to people, talk to individuals, the team or my boss, or outside people, correct? Other people who knows this space much more than me, for example, and to see that do they, if I present this data to them, are they able to believe it, or would they ask me questions? So I like to be questioned, because I think that only when you're being questioned that you're able to learn, or you're able to learn from others of where you may have missed out, which is not your fault, but it's because you just didn't know about it. So I think to be open to learn, I guess, is quite important to me. If not, you'll never ever grow. So yeah.
Yeah, following that line, you also just finished your master with MIT on a sustainability program. Tell us more about it. Your experience, what's your biggest takeaway?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a professional certificate. So it's a 1 year course. We did it online. So anyone who wants to check it out, you can also check it out. It's a 1 year course, but it's broken down into 5 modules. If there's also one module that whoever who's listening wants to take it, you can take on a modular basis. So it does not have to be a 1 year certificate. It can be a 2, 3 months sort of thing. So throughout the 5 modules, I think two of the most memorable modules to me were more technical. because I like to get more technical because my background was in science, correct? So I think that two of the modules stood out to me, which is LCA, life cycle analysis, and circular economy. So for those who may not know, so LCA, life cycle analysis, allows us to actually, it taught me how can we actually evaluate the environmental footprint of a particular product, by understanding or quantifying, as you shared about quantifying the impact when it comes to the energy and the materials needed to actually make this particular product. And beyond that, this product has to be disposed. So there's the idea of cradle to cradle, correct? So it has to be how can I use databases to actually identify, let's say this particular water bottle, how much embodied carbon is being stored in this particular bottle, and at the end of life stage, what is the whole carbon lifespan, or what is the whole carbon amount needed for this particular water bottle. So that the module taught me that how to actually do it using a tool called OpenLCA. I think in that module, I also learned the idea of functional units, because LCA actually is meant to not be used as a standalone. It's always used to compare product A and product B, and people want to show that A is better than B because there's less embodied carbon. But the idea of functional unit is that you need to be able to identify what exactly are you trying to study. Is it apple to apple comparison? Because if you compare a bottle with another bottle which is bigger, for example, it wouldn't be a fair comparison at all. So it taught me how to identify what is a good functional unit. And I think what is also important to me is also the idea that when we compare two items to prove that one have a better embodied carbon, we can't just take a final amount. There has to be a sort of a confidence interval or confidence estimate that has to be used, because we need to do also, they taught me the idea of probability distribution, which is how can we actually trust this particular data that we have actually calculated. Is there any flaws, for example? So that actually taught me such ideas as well. And that's the LCA side of things. I think circular economy, I can give a brief introduction to it. Basically, is sharing that how can we actually transform or rethink the systems around us so that we can reuse, recycle, repurpose the materials and energy resources beyond just its current lifespan. So meaning that instead of just throwing an item away, how can we reuse it again and again, or recycle it? Although recycling, the module also taught me that it's not the best, because recycling requires energy. And if it requires energy, technically it's not a circular economy, because then it's not like endless, for example. So why circular economy is good is because it preserves our natural capital, because it does not require us to keep on extracting resources endlessly, and it also ensures constant renewable flows around us. That's quite good. But I think what stood out to me, if I remember correctly, is that there are some ways we need to do to prevent what they call a circular economy rebound. So the first way is that we need to actually produce quality substitutes. Because if the thing that we're trying to produce from to recycle or to reproduce is of less or lower quality, people wouldn't actually buy it. Then we're just creating another product which there's no demand from other people. Then we're so-called wasting resources still. So the new product that we are creating has to be of equal, if not more, value, so that people will see the demand for it and therefore go for it. So that is something that it taught me. Secondly, is the idea of demand for goods. Is that circular economy, the product that we are creating must not affect the demand for the goods, meaning that, so there's two products, one is new, one is so-called a circular product. The circular product must not make the new product become cheaper because overall there is more supply. If not, it just means that more people can actually go and buy more of these two products. Then on the grand scheme of things, there's actually no value from an environmental perspective. So I think it taught me all these different perspectives that I did not really was aware of before this course. And I can also, so at least I think it shaped how I see certain things after the course. Yeah.
Okay, interesting perspectives. And I think just one comment on the circular economy side, the trick actually sits in the design phase of a product, how you can really design it to be reusable, recyclable without extensive resources.
Yes.
So very interesting. Thanks so much for sharing. I think the last question I have for you is regarding the career development aspect, since we met in MCJ and it's a very neutral ground for people who want to transition into climate, right? So for our general listeners as well who want to go into climate, do you have any tips for them about resources, practices, networking you would recommend?
Sure. I think for me, I think I'll share a few tips. I think first tip, I think to me is no, just go for networking events. I think networking events, I think maybe many of us may think that we go for networking events is we're a bit shy, we're a bit conservative, and we're there because we're not sure what can we contribute, correct? So I think that for me, I think initially during my initial careers, maybe I was also a bit shy. I did not dare to go for that much networking events, but I think the mindset shift that I had or that I learned was that I think I'm there more of trying to meet people, to learn from different people, and to also go with the angle that you're trying to see how you can help them. Because I think that with that mindset, you go into conversations much more easily and you are able to hear problems that are in the market that's happening. And I think that if we have solutions, I think that we should just share it with them and always just have a casual chat. I think that we should not go for networking events to find a job, or we should not go for networking events only because we want to get something out of someone. I think if you go in with that mindset, then it makes it like in our mind we feel like we're a bit selfish, and I think it's not really good. I think we should just go for networking events anytime from now, from even today, to just meet people, and you never know where one connection can lead you to. And that's the first thing. The second thing I like to do is that I like to volunteer. So as was shared earlier, so I volunteer for a few organizations, one of which is we brought out as a trustee for sustainability. So I think volunteering, yes, it requires some time and you have to contribute your time, but I think that everyone always have some spare time. It's what do you do with that spare time that actually makes a difference. If this spare time, you can use a bit of that spare time to actually help an organization in a space that you're particularly interested about or interested in learning about, then why not go for it? Because I think that learning is priceless, right? I think that we always should learn. And therefore, by actually being in an organization, volunteering, you're actually doing it instead of just reading from the screen or watching a YouTube video. You better to actually go out there and do it as well. And through this process, you can also meet people from different nationalities, different geographical locations. And that to me was quite nice. I think the last thing I can share is that I think just keep yourself up to date. Sustainability is it's a fast changing space. Regulations are always changing. You never know what's going to come next. But don't be overwhelmed. You can always just set a cadence to spend half an hour to 1 hour doing it. And if you think you can't finish it, then that's fine. Leave it for the next day. Do not be overwhelmed in one day to take in all the possible information. That's not possible. But I think go in with that mind when you research or when you read news article, go in to just with the mindset of being curious. Not that it may help you with your job, but just because you want to learn to see what's out there. To me, at least, I know learning is quite fun for me, and I think that's what I like to do.
Totally echo on that. And also, one more just additional line for the networking part. Throughout my experience in the climate circle, I find everyone to be super open and engaging. And even though you come here without, you feel like you don't have experience, don't have much to contribute, there is always some interesting conversations that you can absorb as well. And maybe in the beginning, it's not always you can give something, but the idea is to pass it forward. Once
Yes.
you accumulate enough knowledge, you can do this for other people.
I can also share that the sustainability thing is quite fun. I think whoever who wants to transit into this space, maybe you can just think of what skills do you have, because you could be an engineer, you could be a data scientist, you could be a physicist, for example. There are transferable skills that you can be used in this space. I think what is important is to map out what is the ideal role you're looking out for and what skills do you have, and see if there's a linkage. And if you're not sure, you can just use LinkedIn to find someone who is in the particular role that you want to land yourself in, and you can reach out to 10 people, maybe two will reply to you, correct? And then you can just talk to them and see whether, say that, I have ABC skills and I know you're doing this job. Do you think my skills is useful for this particular role? So I think that will give you more confidence. And I'm sure there's going to be a match. Just be mindfully matching it to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the concept of mapping first where you want to go and then networking to get there. All right, Luis, now it comes to our final part, which is the lightning round. I'll start with the questions. The first
Okay.
one on sustainability tip. Can you share one simple sustainability practice that you incorporated into your daily life?
Sure. I think for me, it's just being conscious about what we can be better at or what can we do differently. For example, simply bring your own box when you go out for your meals. You do not have to do it every day, correct? But I think it's being conscious that you can do it and you should do it because there's a particular impact. And I think that people always say that these are small actions and they don't really matter, but I think that it shows or it reflects on you in a sense. And these small actions do actually add up. So that is what I want to share. And also that all these small actions, you do not need to go and find sustainability actions as a chore. You should do things at first on what you're more comfortable with. And eventually, once you get the hang of it, once you see the value of it, then you can do the so-called harder things as well. So
Yeah.
just try, just look into your life and see what can you improve on there.
Build the sustainability muscle memory.
Yes, correct.
The second question on technology, I think this is your expertise. Can you name a technology or innovation that you believe has great potential or for positive environmental impact?
Yes, I think there's a lot of technologies out there. I think also the caveat that, I think there's a lot of buzzword out there that innovation is the next big thing. But I also wanted to share that innovation is not the entire thing. It is the next big thing, maybe, but a lot of traditional technologies which are already being implemented can actually be used much better. You just need more funding, for example. So innovation is not the only way. But of course, when it comes to innovation, the things that I'm particularly interested about is about the carbon dioxide removal thing that I think I briefly shared a little bit earlier, because at least from the different model simulations, climate model simulations in particular, they said that, or they reflected that if we really believe in limiting our temperature to the increase of less than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, we really do need this carbon dioxide removal technology. So yes, it's more expensive now, but I think that with funding that comes in, it is possible, especially in the US. I know that this ITC and PTC are tax credits that is being used as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. I guess that helps a bit. I think the world will I believe, I hope we have more grants and more incentives to actually incentivize carbon dioxide removal technologies to be out. So in summary, there is drawbacks currently, but I think that more time and more effort has to still be placed into this field because it's much needed. This may not be the sole way, and this should not be the sole way of reaching our targets, but this has to be one of the many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely very necessary as proven by science, as we
Yeah.
are lagging behind on all the other sectors and targets. And I think the data says we need annually around 5 to 10 gigatons of carbon removal from these new technologies. So definitely, the next one is, let's talk about data. What do you see as the biggest opportunity in using data for climate impacts?
Sure. So the biggest opportunity using data, I think that, of course, the collection of data has to be where it, to me, is most important. So that's what we call sensors. So there's a lot of different companies that actually provide sensors which can be placed at localized location, for example, in the mining site, to actually collect accurate and actionable insights from the location. For example, you can get real life data of the carbon emissions or carbon leakage from the particular location. That's quite important to me. I think secondly is the idea of remote sensing technologies. So like satellites, drones to actually monitor and capture real-time environmental data. I think I came across a company which looks into the carbon credit space, and they work with some satellite technology which is able to actually monitor the forestry landscape, for example, to see whether it's actually growing any forest fire. So this real-time data to me is especially important, and remote sensing does that. And I think the last thing is just climate modeling with data. So using like machine learning or AI to actually, there's a lot of data out there, but how can we get a clear or better understanding of the relationships or the trends or the patterns in those data? I think AI and climate models will play a big role for that. So these are the things that I think there are a lot of opportunities in.
Yeah, for sure. We need more reliable data and more coverage, so collection, and then once we get the data, extract more insight out. Next question about yourself. What is one sustainability goal that you set for yourself this year?
Sure. So I think one goal that I set for myself is that, so some context, so I'm currently in Singapore. So Singapore is quite accessible in terms of able to get around. I think that my goal or what I've already doing is to go out to nature like about once a week, because Singapore is quite urbanized, but there are still some parks and still some areas where we can go out to appreciate the environment. So the goal is that to go out maybe twice a week to just experience it out there, because my childhood I did go out quite often for picnics and all sorts of things. I think I want to relive those sides of things as well. So I think it's to go out there to appreciate nature, to just slow down. I think we tend to push ourselves too hard sometimes. I think it's important to slow down and restart and recalibrate ourselves for the longer journey, because I think life is not really a sprint, it's a very long marathon. So it's important to stay calm and then we're able to move on further. Yes.
I like it. It touches on the mental sustainability
Yes.
aspect.
Yeah.
Okay, last question about data misconception. What is a common misconception about data in the sustainability sector that you'd like to debunk?
Sure. I think the fact that I think I briefly shared this earlier about the idea of correlation and causation, that these two are not exactly the same. But I think I also wanted to share the idea of data mining, is that, data, whenever we receive a set of data, it could be because the particular researcher or the particular inventor actually cherry pick certain data to support a desired outcome, because it's important or it's easy to show that diversity affects company performance. But we need to, and we're able to find different aspects of diversity and and then say that, okay, out of diversity there are these 10 different components, and since these two supports, when these two increase, company performance increase, therefore these two factors should be the most important factors. But that may not be the case, correct? That may not be what we see. So I think what is a misconception is that, or what I would recommend the audience and even myself to do, is to be more aware of where the data come from. Are there contradicting views? What is the background of the researcher or the author? And then not trust data too much, but also use it well. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Luis. I think we touched upon a lot of interesting topics, and it's great to know your perspective as a sustainability manager and talking all about ESG reporting. So thanks a lot for sharing, and I hope to see you around.
Yes, thank you so much, Tabby, and thank you